What's up, guys? Welcome back to the second episode of my YouTube channel. I actually just realized I didn't create an intro video for this channel. I'm still working on that. A little bit about me. I am a Jamaican-born actor and writer living here in LA for a few years now. So here's the deal. My goal is to create a variety of content with the aim to teach you something new every time you come to this channel. I will do short films, panel discussions, and mini documentaries. Hopefully, you'll find something that you like. Now, Jamaica has produced many superstars. Stars like Bob Marley, Grace Jones, Usain Bolt, Dr. Henry Lowe, and Marcus Garvey. Now, many of you might be wondering, who the heck is Marcus Garvey? Today, we will dive into the most important black revolutionary to ever walk the face of this earth. Now, his life and work in the 1920s inspired every black leader that followed. Now, we will look at how the FBI systematically sabotaged his movement in an effort to undermine his credibility and legacy. Now, before I jump into this, here are 3 good books to read about the life of Marcus Garvey. Number 1, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey, or Africa for the Africans. Number 2, Negro with a Hat by Colin Grant. And number 3, Selected Writings and Speeches of Marcus Garvey. Marcus Mosiah Garvey was born on August 17, 1887 in St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica, specifically on 32nd Market Street, to parents Marcus Garvey Sr. and Sarah Ann Richards. Now, Marcus Garvey Sr. was a gravedigger and a mason that worked in St. Anne's Bay Cemetery, and his mom, Sarah, worked as a domestic worker. So from the start, Marcus Garvey was pretty lucky to have both parents working and living in the same household. Now, his father was a very peculiar man in that he built himself a library and had volumes of books, which is where Garvey developed a knack for reading. Garvey later became a voracious reader. One day, while Garvey and his father was at the bottom of a grave, his father climbed to the surface and quickly pulled up the ladder, leaving young Garvey at the bottom to find his own way out. And that sounds like child abuse, right? Not so much. It was on this day that he learned self-reliance. After numerous unanswered pleas, Garvey realized that he could only rely on himself for help. At a young age, Garvey was fond of a young white girl who was his neighbor, Joyce Wary. They basically grew up together, but her dad opposed an interracial relationship, so he sent her away to England and forbade her to speak with Marcus Garvey. That was actually the first time that Garvey experienced racism, and unfortunately, it wouldn't be the last. Joyce's father had called him a nigger. This interaction would set Garvey on a path to lift up and honor black women and leave them white girls alone, which he did. Garvey then left St. Anne to work with his uncle in Kingston as a printer's apprentice, and then he went on to be the youngest foreman printer at the age of 18. At that time, Jamaica was still importing foremen from Canada and Britain. Now, while in Kingston, Garvey met Dr. Joseph Robert Love, who taught him about Pan-Africanism. Dr. Love owned a newspaper called the Jamaica Advocate, and this later inspired Garvey to create his own newspaper, which he called the Negro World. He then met Sandy Cox, who was the organizer of the National Club, which sought to fight British colonialism on the island. Now, Garvey was so excited to start his own movement, so much so that he then went to Costa Rica to work as a timekeeper on a banana plantation called the United Fruit Company, to save up just enough capital to start his movement. His activism became problematic to the point where he was arrested in Costa Rica and banned for writing a column in the La Nacion that urged workers to fight for better conditions and to have pride in themselves. Now, this ban from Costa Rica would be the catalyst that sent Garvey to many other nations in Latin America, where he noticed that the black man's plight for equality was the same wherever he went. Panama, Venezuela, Honduras, Ecuador, all the same. What many might not know is that Garvey was the student before he became the world-renowned orator. He subsequently left Latin America and went to England, where he frequently visited the House of Commons to listen to speakers on the corner. And he also worked for Pan-Africanism journals like the Africa Times and the Orient Review. On July 20th, 1914, after Garvey returned to Jamaica, he met Amy Ashwood, and they started the first ever chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement and Conservation Association and African Communities League. With the motto, "One aim, one God, one destiny," Garvey managed to garner a small following, and he set out on his first ambitious plan to build a school. However, due to financial issues, Garvey had to travel to America in hopes to get enough money and to speak with Booker T. Washington about building the school. On March 24, 1916, when Garvey arrived in Harlem, he was penniless, and so he moved in with a Jamaican family. He quickly found a job as a printer and began doing his street corner speeches, which yet again garnered him a small following. He was later invited to do his first formal speech, and to the disappointment of many, Garvey trembled like a leaf. It was reported that he was so nervous that he lost his balance, fell off stage, and landed on his face. Now, this completely humiliated him. However, he didn't give up, and he kept on studying great orators and reconstructed his whole performance. Now, coming from Jamaica, Garvey saw the horrors of the Jim Crow era in America and wrote W.E. Du Bois, editor of The Crisis, which was the NAACP's quarterly magazine, asking for support. When Garvey got no response, he personally went to the NAACP headquarters to meet Du Bois, but Du Bois made sure not to be there. When Garvey arrived, he was astonished at the overwhelming number of light-skinned and white workers holding the most desirable positions at the organization. Garvey accused Du Bois and the whole entire NAACP of colorism. Du Bois flat out denied this, claiming that colorism might exist in the Caribbean, but not in America. No, Du Bois, he was lying though, as he most certainly knew of the brown paper bag tests that many churches, jobs, civic groups, and HBCUs conducted that would subsequently bar many dark-skinned African Americans from joining. Needless to say, the two were loggerheads throughout their lives, as Du Bois believed in integration, while Garvey believed in separatism and the communal self-help. Now, can you imagine how much more powerful an impact there would be if the UNIA and the NAACP worked together in the fight for equality? At that time in history, there were two main strategies of African American leadership that emerged: lobbyist reform and group economics. The NAACP practiced the former and Garvey the latter. One of the main reasons why Garveyism took precedence was because its leader resonated with many dark-skinned poor blacks who weren't fortunate enough to have a degree. Garvey was the underdog, as he was the immigrant and a self-educated man. On the other hand, W.E. Du Bois believed in the talented 10th, an elite of college-educated African Americans who would lead the masses as they lobbied for equal rights. Du Bois thought Garveyism was a direct contradiction to his movement. Now fast forward to July 2nd, 1917, when a race riot breaks out in East St. Louis, Illinois, and a white mob fueled by lies from the media, and these lies were basically that blacks came to St. Louis to vote Republican and to steal their jobs, murdered close to 150 blacks, beating, burning, and lynching them. Du Bois led a silent march in protest to the massacre. Garvey was outraged at the response and spoke out criticizing Du Bois. He said,
"For 250 years, we have struggled under the rigors of slavery. We were maimed, we were brutalized, we were ravaged in every way. We are men. We have passions. We have feelings. We have desires just like any other race. Dive down, black men, and take. Reach up, black men and women, and pull all of nature's knowledge to you. If those like W.E.B. Du Bois believe that the race problem will be solved in America through higher education, they will walk between now and eternity and never see that race problem solved. Any leadership that teaches you to depend on another race is a leadership that will enslave you.
Now, after the riot, Garvey became completely fixated on the fact that blacks will never fully integrate and must be militant in their approach in seeking equality. Does this remind you of a certain man we all know? I will dive more into Malcolm X later, showing you how connected he is to Garvey, more than you imagine. Word of Garvey's speeches were spreading as he talked about black pride, self-confidence, and unity. No other black leader at the time spoke like this. It was said that Booker T. Washington, before he died, gave Garvey his stamp of approval. In December 1919, Garvey opened the first division of the UNIA in Harlem, and his following grew and grew. He toured the nation and established a branch of the UNIA in almost every state he visited. At its peak, he had over 1,000 branches across the world and over 6 million members and was collecting millions in donations. The same Garvey who shook like a leaf was now captivating audiences. His mere presence would ignite the people, causing them to scream and shout. Now Marcus realized this, and he wrote one of his most famous quotes.
The pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier than them both put together.
To be a member of the UNIA, you had to pledge 35 cents, and you would get a photo and a uniform. The uniform provided a sense of pride and was the main attraction on parade days. People would come out in droves to see Garvey drive down the streets of Harlem. Now, due to the growing membership of the UNIA, Garvey bought a church, which he turned into the headquarters of the UNIA. He was also one of the first advocates for women upliftment back in the 1920s. He wanted black women to have just as much confidence and strength as any man. He gave them a uniform and a sense of purpose by idealizing them. He wanted to lift up their image from just being domestic workers. So Marcus used the Negro world to promote this imagery. He dedicated a woman's page, which oftentimes spoke about the role of women in the workplace and in the homes. In the UNIA, black women were working as secretaries, nurses, specifically the Black Cross nurses, head of councils, journalists, managers, and etc. On the outside, this would be a very hard thing to achieve, especially if these women were very dark-skinned. The Black Cross nurses were so influential that they recruited 2/3 of the UNIA's young following. Amy Jacques Garvey, Garvey's second wife, was editor of the Woman's Page, and often she wrote stories of women accomplishments across the world to inspire her women readers. She wrote an incredible essay, which she stated,
"We are tired of hearing black men say that there's a better day coming, while they do nothing to usher in the day. We are becoming so impatient that we are getting in the front ranks and serve notice to the world that we will brush aside the halting, cowardly Negro leaders."
Mr. Garvey started many businesses to fund his ambitions for the UNIA. He started the Negro World newspaper, which he sold for 5 cents, an investment fund, Universal Laundromat, Universal Restaurants, Universal Grocery Stores, hotels, a doll factory, and the Negro Factories Corporation. Now, Garvey understood economics as he was a disciple of Booker T. Washington's economic self-help strategy. However, unbeknownst to Garvey, he had appointed some shady people in leadership over the affairs of the UNIA. Now, due to the incompetence and the ulterior motives of these workers, they mismanaged the money from donors, causing a disgruntled man to go to the main office and attempt to assassinate Garvey by shooting him 3 times. Now, he survived and did a speaking engagement the following day, which sort of immortalized him as this invincible man. Not all thought he was invincible, though. The BI, the Bureau of Investigation, predecessor of the FBI, learned of Garvey's influence, and under the leadership of J. Edgar Hoover, one of the most celebrated racists of all times, began a covert operation to destroy the UNIA in the name of preserving American democracy, or better put, preserving the status quo. However, this did not deter Garvey, and he began to write radical speeches promoting revolution for all blacks in the diaspora, which he did in the Negro world. This subsequently caused the newspaper to be banned from almost every country: Jamaica, Belize, Europe, UK, Africa, etc. It was said that black boys from many of these countries would memorize Garvey's speeches and recite them to large gatherings. This was especially important for those black people who could not read at the time. Now, because Garvey was so pro-black, he never had white friends or allies, at least at that time. Hoover was so desperate to sabotage him that he appointed the first ever black spy who operated under the code name Agent 800, but his real name was James Wormley Jones, to infiltrate the Garvey movement, finding any evidence to build a case strong enough to deport him. Now, Agent 800 reported that Garvey's movement was becoming militant and hostile towards white in America, and Garveyites were fired up to take action. Now, Garvey took another ambitious business venture which would unfortunately seal his fate. He saw how black folks in America would pay for first-class tickets for a cruise, but were never allowed to sit up front, would eat only after whites would, and had to stay in the black sections of these ships. He then decided to start a shipping and cruise company called the Black Star Line to move cargo and black people across the world. In 1919, he offered the Black Star Line stock for sale, starting at $5 a share. On November 1919, the Yarmouth, the first ship of the Star Line, was docked in Harlem for the world to see. It sailed across the Caribbean, but due to dire maintenance issues, it was quickly put out of commission. Now, this was due to Garvey being betrayed by his subordinates. His hand-picked captain convinced Garvey to buy the Yarmouth for almost 5 to 6 times its worth, which he got a kickback of $1,600 for. In addition, the man he appointed to do the inspection of the ship was an FBI spy who informed Garvey there were no problems with the ship. The Black Star Line went on to acquire 2 more ships, the Shady Side and the Kanawha, which were in similar conditions, spending over $200,000. To add fuel to the fire, A. Philip Randolph, editor of the Messenger magazine, Du Bois, editor of the Crisis, and Sewell Briggs, editor of the Crusader magazine, formed a coalition which gave birth to the Garvey Must Go campaign. Randolph accused Garvey of swindling money from his supporters. The coalition wrote to the federal government to step up investigations of fraud into the Black Star Line enterprise. Between 1921 and 1924, these magazines released an onslaught of articles with the intention to stir up propaganda and increase suspicion on Garvey's activities. The Crusader even claimed that Garvey had raped a little white girl. Du Bois struck a low blow when he described Garvey as a little fat black man, ugly, but with intelligent eyes and a big head. Now, these attacks on his personal appearance had nothing to do with the legitimacy of his movement. It can be concluded that the coalition did this for their own personal political and financial gains. As support for their own ideologies declined, Garveyism was on the rise. They knew if they could eliminate Garvey, they would gain those millions in donations that Garvey was receiving. In the coalition's last attempt to extirpate Garvey, they wrote a letter to the Attorney General, Harry Daugherty, in 1922, proclaiming that Garvey was an agitator to the current harmonious race relations in America and therefore was a threat to the status quo. The status quo at the time was that whites being at top of the social ladder. Not only did the coalition arouse suspicion amongst Garvey followers, but they also alienated him, making him vulnerable to attacks from the racist government at the time. This was even more evident in the ending statements of the letter, which states, "The government should note that Garvey followers are for the most part voteless, insinuating that the government could proceed with prosecution without fear of public backlash from blacks. In January of 1922, Garvey and his Vice President Orlando Thompson, Treasurer George Tobias, and Secretary Eli Garcia were arrested for mail fraud. The government quickly seized all records from the Black Star Line and mailed out questionnaires to stockholders, who were all UNIA members, in an effort to collect incriminating evidence. Now stay tuned for part 2 as I show you how the court case transpired and how Garvey was robbed of a fair trial.